One Ferrari driver has 2 podium finishes in Formula 1 this season, while the other hasn't finished higher than 6th. Sebastian Vettel's leaving the famous Italian team at the end of 2020 because he's seen a surplus to requirements at Maranello following the arrival of Charles Leclerc. And races like the British Grand Prix, when Vettel was fortunate to even finish 10th while Charles Leclerc was 3rd, will only reinforce that view. But there's more to the Ferrari drivers' contrasting fortunes than Vettel simply limping to F1's scrap heap. And the Ferrari tactic that made Leclerc one of the stars of the Silverstone race also played a part in Vettel's confidence reaching an all-time low. We'll pause this deep dive for just a second to thank everybody who has watched our videos so far and all of you who have subscribed to the race already. Give us a thumbs up if you have and ring the bell if you haven't. This magical floating arrow will be your guide. Now you can give us the thumbs up. Thank you, arrow. Right, let's get into how Ferrari has unleashed Leclerc's brilliance but made Vettel's life harder at the same time. Ferrari had been expected to suffer a difficult Silverstone event given the fears its down-on power engine would be exposed on a power-sensitive circuit where the Wellington and Hangar straights are now joined by a long flat-out run from Luffield to Beckett's. And based on the performance across the opening rounds, Ferrari's car would not have the cornering speed to compensate. So Ferrari worked on optimising a low downforce aerodynamic package, best exemplified by comparing its Silverstone rear wing with the high downforce barn door version it had in Hungary, and the rear wing it started the season with in Austria. After a mixed Friday with what Leclerc called quite a radical approach to downforce, he was in the mix on 1 lap pace but hopelessly adrift on long runs. Qualifying looked promising, so getting track position seemed achievable, although the race pace was an underlying concern. Ferrari reckoned this low downforce package was worth a couple attempts at Silverstone, and ultimately this proved crucial for the whole weekend. It allowed Leclerc to get through Q2 using only the medium tyres and helped him finish clear of the midfield cars in Q3 and even rival Max Verstappen's Red Bull for 3rd on the grid. And whether it was perfect judgment of the setup changes from Friday to Saturday, the weather moving in the team's favour, or the circumstances of the race itself, Leclerc surprisingly had a routine Grand Prix. He described his time management as easy and said Ferrari's car was actually very nice to drive. But without the extra tenths that an optimised low downforce package provided and the track position he won with it on Saturday, that probably wouldn't have been the case. Vettel had a miserable weekend by comparison, and everything that could go wrong did, apart from retiring from the race. He lost all of FP1 because of an intercooler problem, and pedal assembly issues hurt him in FP2. FP3 was fairly normal despite more pedal aggravation, but going into qualifying Vettel was significantly less prepared than anybody else. With an aggressive low downforce package to learn and Vettel traditionally struggling with a car not tuned to his liking, particularly when it's lively at the rear, this was always going to count against him. And so it proved with a nervy run through qualifying in which he needed soft tyres to get into Q3 and then lacked any kind of confidence on turning through the high speed corners. Vettel should have been able to progress from 10th on the grid though, but actually ran outside of the points for most of the Grand Prix. He got mugged by Pierre Gasly's AlphaTauri and looked set for a 12th place finish after the recovering Red Bull of Alex Albon passed him late on. Vettel only sneaked a point because of tyre failures for Bottas and Carlos Sainz Jr, but was even told he was P12 after the race before his engineer corrected himself. That was just part of a telling exchange, if it can be called that, in which Vettel remained completely silent even after Mattia Binotto had come over the radio to sympathise with his struggles. In fact, Vettel only spoke when he was almost into the pit lane entry and asked for a radio check. Elaborating later, Vettel said he was just struggling massively for grip and that his confidence level is quite low at the moment because I'm struggling to get a feel for the car and every time I try and push, I lose the car. The inquest will be well underway with a view to finding a clear problem or trialling solutions to make Vettel more comfortable, because this isn't the first time he's felt unhappy in the SF1000 this season. After all, he enjoyed a difficult season opener in Austria, where he was 10th again, and is currently a lowly 13th in the points. A low downforce setup like Ferrari has puts a huge emphasis on commitment through the corners and keeping the time lost there as small as possible. Leclerc's qualifying lap compared to Vettel, but also the leading cars from Mercedes and Red Bull, give a clear insight into what he could get the Ferrari to do that Vettel simply could not. An example of the impact of Ferrari's setup was that Leclerc had to lift through cops in qualifying when the others were flat out pretty quickly in practice, even last year's slowest team, Williams. The Ferrari was moving around a lot, but Leclerc was still aggressive on turn-in and hustling the car to the apex. He maintained an ultra impressive minimum speed through the corners, and his first sector was especially good in this regard. Data traces we've seen show it was aided by maintaining a small amount of throttle while others came off it completely, indicating the finer techniques that Leclerc was employing to get something out of the car that Vettel couldn't. Sure, in the race he benefited from Bottas's tyre failure to finish on the podium, and was flattered by one Red Bull being out of the picture and Racing Point underachieving once again, but the rostrum was his reward for the vital track position he had earned in qualifying, and team boss Binotto was full of praise for how Leclerc was patient during the Grand Prix and saved his tyres for the entire race. Nonetheless, Leclerc's starring role shouldn't overshadow the concern for Vettel's side of the garage. Unless Ferrari finds an obvious problem, it will need to work very hard on giving its driver what he needs to close the gap. Ferrari's efforts so far have rewarded Leclerc and somewhat punished Vettel. No doubt actually letting him drive in practice will be a good start in fixing that. So do you think Ferrari needs to shoulder some of the blame for Vettel's struggles? Or is Vettel just a wounded giant struggling to keep up with a megastar teammate? Let us know in the comments below, give this video a like if you haven't already, and make sure you subscribe to join us again for future videos like this one and loads more.